Hi class! Today we have our sculptures finished and we're ready to start adding color to them. What we'll be using to add color to our sculptures is a material called underglaze. Underglaze is essentially just liquid clay with a colorant added into it. We use Amico brand underglazes. So the things that I'm going to teach you today are how to use this particular type of underglaze. The nice thing about underglaze is that it works just like paint. So we'll have lots of different colors for you to choose from. You can read the label to know what the color is, and what it looks like inside the jar is pretty much how it will turn out. However, we might not have every single color for you to achieve that trompe-l'oeil effect to make your clay sculpture look like your original object. So for example, this is just a weird little thing that I made up real quick for an example. But let's say this part of the sculpture I wanted to look like metal. Well, I have a jet black underglaze as well as a white underglaze, and I'm going to need to mix those together in order to try to achieve a silver-like color. So what I'll do is just get a palette or something to mix on. First I'm going to take my underglaze and I'm going to make sure it's mixed up really well. Sometimes the jar lids aren't put back on tight, so you probably want to double check the jar lid as well to make sure that it's closed before you start shaking it. Trust me, we've had some bad experiences with underglazes flying all over the place. So I'm going to pour a little bit of white and a tiny bit of black here too. And then in the middle, I can mix my underglazes together until I get the color that I'm looking for, which for me will be kind of this light gray color. When we're painting on underglaze, we always want to use the biggest brush possible for the job. So I could use a brush this size if I wanted to paint this part of the sculpture, and I think this brush will be fine for me to also paint this little part that I want to make look like metal. So I'm going to try to brush on a nice, smooth, even coat over the entire thing. I'm using just the tip of the brush to kind of get into these smaller areas. And let's say I made a mistake, I can still wipe that off with a damp sponge. Okay, I'll do the back side of it as well. Remember, with a sculpture, all sides matter. And this really works best when your clay is bone dry, meaning that there's no more moisture left in the clay. You can begin to paint your sculpture when it is leather hard. It just takes longer for it to dry. Okay, as you can see, the underglaze has already begun to dry. It's almost dry, really. And that's good because I have to paint 3 coats of underglaze on this to achieve a solid color. If I only painted 1 coat on here, most of that colorant would burn away when it goes in the kiln. So that's why we need 3 even coats. So I'm going to let this dry completely before I add on the second coat. Okay, now that second coat is dry, I can go ahead and put on a 3rd coat, and this will be my final coat. But I am thinking about, now that I achieved this gray color, it doesn't necessarily look exactly like metal. So I might want to start thinking about what kind of other details can I add to this with the underglaze that would help make it look more like metal. Okay, and now I have that 3rd coat on there. Let that dry as well. And I think I'm going to put just a few little streaks of white on top of that to achieve a sort of the look of a reflection. Now, if you're just using the color straight out of the jar and you don't need to mix it, you can just dip your brush right in there. We just want to make sure we're not contaminating our jars of underglaze, because these are an expensive material. They're usually a color like white is $18. Any of the other colorants that have red in them, like red, orange, pink, purple, they're almost $40 a jar. So we want to just be really mindful that we're not wasting them or contaminating them. Okay, so I have a clean, smaller brush, and I'm going to put a few little kind of reflections of white. Try to make it look like metal. Okay, so there are my details. When I'm done, I want to make sure I clean my brushes at the sink and then put them back in the brush container. I also want to make sure that my underglaze lids are screwed on tightly, and I'm going to wash my palette out at the sink as well.